Austen Goolsbee is in Chicago. He's an economics professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Austen, first of all, what's your overall reaction to the blueprint that's been presented so far? How could this impact the average American?
Well, I think for the average American, it won't do a whole lot. There might be a modest amount of lower taxes for somebody right in the middle of the income distribution. If you mean a very high-income person, they're going to be overjoyed by the blueprint that they laid out. I wouldn't call it a plan exactly because it's just one page. It's just saying they want to dramatically cut the corporate rates and cut the rates on different types of business income for high-income people.
Well, as it stands now, then, is this outline perceived as more of a negotiating tool, or is this something that you can actually see making it in some way, shape, or form to the president's desk?
No, this is not detailed enough to make it to the president's desk. It's barely a skeleton. It's more like a ghost. I would say the two things that came out of this, and maybe it's a negotiating tactic, but this isn't really a negotiation with the Democrats. This is a negotiation within the Republican Party. And the main thing about that negotiation is how big of a deficit explosion is the Republican Party going to be willing to put up with to get the tax cut that they want.
So on that
this
point,
was a statement by the Trump administration, I think, that they don't care what they propose very few pay-fors and very big tax cuts. So I think in that sense, it's kind of a signal to the Republicans of let's just cut.
So based on what you just said, Austen, is cutting the corporate tax rate to 15%, you think, realistic in terms of what Congress might be willing to do?
Maybe, I don't know. There's the question. By historical standards, no way. This will cost $2 to $3 trillion added to the deficit over 10 years. So if they were going by previous standards, there's no way in a million years Republicans would agree. Obviously, we're in a different context because now there's a Republican president, so they're clearly willing to have some deficit expansion. The administration are going to try to claim, well, maybe the tax cuts will pay for themselves.
That's what Secretary Mnuchin said,
I think we're likely to find. What? Say that again?
That's what Secretary Mnuchin says.
Yeah, I know that's what he said. I think we're very likely to find that the normal nonpartisan referees of that, like the Congressional Budget Office or the Tax Policy Center, are not going to agree with that statement at all. So I think we'll be back into just a political framing. And the question will be, how do traditional Republicans who care about fiscal responsibility but also want tax cuts, where do they come down on this?
So one way you could offset this is with this controversial border adjustment provision. But this is not something that the White House appears to necessarily be behind. First of all, Austen, can you just explain what exactly this tax would do, and why do you think it is that the White House does not appear to be on board with that idea?
Well, I think those two questions are totally related. What it is and why the White House backed away from it are quite tied. Through a changing of the tax system by what's allowed to be deducted, et cetera, it would effectively remove the corporate income tax and convert it into a national value-added tax, essentially. And that means it would reduce the tax burden by some $2 trillion on corporations, and it would increase the tax burden by some $2 trillion on consumers. And as consumers and retailers began to recognize that, so too did the White House begin to recognize that, and then people could not get away from that thing fast enough. So that is why I don't think it's in this plan.
And so just to zoom in a little bit more, you're saying basically that cost would be passed on to people going into their Walmarts or Targets. They would notice these things.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely right. Okay. All right, Austen Goolsbee, thank you so much for helping us break all of this down. Really appreciate your time.